copper coming up. Holy shit. Alright, so last time we blew up our starter, and today I want to examine the starter clutch. Take a closer look at the starter clutch to make sure that is working correctly, and that rules out my number one theory, which is that the starter clutch never disengaged the starter, and when we revved the engine, it spun that starter to oblivion. So this is our right side crankcase. This is our clutch here. This is our starter clutch is right here. I know that's confusing. This is the clutch for the engine that makes the engine shift gears and everything. And this is the clutch for the starter. This is actually our crankshaft right in here. And then on the end of that crankshaft is our starter clutch. And then our starter normally is right here. There's a little gear that runs this gear. And then there's also normally another gear that goes right here in between. And you can see this is just a gear. Gear interacts with the starter clutch. And in theory, the starter clutch only spins it only engages one way. So that when the starter spins, it can grab onto here and push this gear around. And once the engine starts spinning on its own, it's supposed to sort of disengage. It's essentially the gear, this gear here should not spin in theory once the engine is running, and therefore not spin the starter. But I think we were right, we might have been spinning the starter, and that was our problem. So in theory, like this it should engage one way, and then the other way it should spin freely. And so with this gear out, there's nothing engaged here on the starter clutch in theory, and it should spin freely one way, and it does not. I can't move that either way. We're going to take it apart. We're going to look at all the components in there, make sure that we have all the components in there, take a close look at how the components are laid out in there to make sure that we didn't put something in the wrong spot or something. Alright, so taking things apart here, we've got our little bolt on the end. And that's got a big fat washer as well. That's how it's supposed to be. And we've got, this is our, I forget the correct name, but it's our little sensor, like for the camshaft, or maybe the crankshaft sensor. Basically it picks this up, these little signals as it goes around. And so that's what that is for. And then this is our clutch itself right here. And then in theory, okay, yeah, the clutch is supposed to work this way, where you can see where it spins that way freely. I can easily spin it that way, but then this way it locks up. So was that working? That's my question. All right, I'm gonna play around for a second here and put this back on. Okay, so yeah, the gear itself can spin that way. So yeah, that should work just fine. All right, so our service manual, we're looking at this little part right here. There's supposed to be our little sensor guy out here, a little sensor cog, our starter clutch, and then it shows a needle bearing and like a weird washer, and then this other gear in the back. So where is that needle bearing and the weird washer? I'm thinking that they're in here, maybe. Oh, wait a minute, I see an issue. This guy here is not lined up. You can see there's little grooves down in this little recesses, little grooves down on this gear here, and this thing has some little bumps out on it, and those bumps are not in that groove. I don't know if you can see that. You should be able to see that. This should I think, come out. But yeah, we might need to fix that. This does look fucked. All right, so here it is. It doesn't really want to come apart, not by hand. So I'm going to take some countermeasures. The most simplest with the screwdriver here. There we go. So yeah, that piece, I might need a new one of these. This was a little bit messed up. Take this apart. So yeah, you can see the needle bearing, which is right here. This guy, and this is our starter clutch down in there. You can see there's a big circlip that holds that clutch down in there. And it's a series of a whole bunch of little roller bearings essentially in there that are making that starter clutch do its thing. So I don't know that this would actually affect the functionality of this thing, but I am concerned that it would. All right, I had this on backwards. You'll note on this gear there's 4 little recesses on there, and that on this washer here, we'll call it, it's actually called a guide, that this guy has 4 little bumps on it, and they seem to correspond. Like they line up perfectly. And so when I put this thing back together, previously I assumed that these were supposed to line up like that. And I'm wrong. Looking at the service manual here, this thing does not go on in this orientation. It goes on in this orientation. So why they have these recesses and whatnot like that, I don't know. I can only assume this is for like strength or whatever, additional strength on this thing. Maybe these are supposed to be oil passages or something. But yeah, it's supposed to go on like that. If these are just oil passages, I don't think I've done any damage to this. And then this thing, again, I don't think I've done any actual functional damage to it. So I'm going to reuse this stuff, basically. I'm going to go ahead and file. This does have some little sharp edges on it now. I'm going to go ahead and file those off. And then I test fit it on the bike the other way, on the other end of the bike where it fits in, and it slides beautifully in there. It rotates beautifully. So I don't see how this could interfere or cause a problem. So we're going to try using it again, but the proper way this time. Because yeah, I could order another one, but you know, that would cost me another like at least 30 something bucks. It's more like at least 35 bucks basically. Where I am definitely being cheap here. And that would be for a used one, it would be 35 bucks. If I bought them new, it's like 200, 300 bucks. If this was jammed in here like this, right? And it was torqued down, like, yeah, we could have been essentially like holding this gear so that it could not spin freely this way. It was locked in place with the crankshaft. I think that's what the case was. I mean, that has to have been what it was. We definitely did spin the starter to death because we had this whole clutch and gear system. It was just a one solid connection essentially. There was no free spinning aspect to it. We took the clutch out of the equation entirely. There was no starter clutch. There was functionally no starter clutch, and so yeah, that's what happened. That's my fault, dude, because I did have this apart, and I did put this guide here in backwards, basically, and that's my fault for thinking I know what I'm doing, you know, thinking I can figure stuff out on the fly. That's an amateur mistake, basically. You see those guys like just wing it. I think those guys are winging it on things that they have already learned how to do it. They've done it several times on that exact same type of machine, and that's when you might be able to wing it. But if you're working on a machine for the first time, you've never worked on a VFR before or whatever it is, like, do not wing it. All right, and then we have our pulse generator. That's what this funky guy there is. And we've got our washer and our bolt. That guy can go on there. And I did put a bunch of oil inside that clutch. Pre-oiled that thing, so we should be good there. Man, I'm so glad we figured this out. Alright, so now our starter should show up in the mail today. It was supposed to show up yesterday. It should show up today, and then we can get this thing buttoned back up. I'm gonna put the starter in there first and then button everything back up, and then we can try starting it again. It also sounded kind of, when it was running, because we were spinning the starter, I think, it sounded funny to me. And you guys might not have really been able to hear it on the video because just, you know, it might have been edited in whatever way that was it's harder to hear stuff on the video, you know. It sounded funny to me. So testing our little starter here, starter clutch. This is how it's supposed to work. So the starter, see that? See how it spins freely? So the starter would be in here, and the starter would turn this thing, it would spin this guy this way, right? In this direction. And that would start the engine, and then the crankshaft would start spinning on its own because the engine's going. This gear would be left alone, basically, would stop moving. But you can test it by pushing it back here. You see how easily that moves back. One little finger, and then this way it does not move. So, wow. Yeah, I couldn't move that at all previously. Now it moves great. All right, we figured it out. And again, it's my idiocy that led us down this path. All right, now this gets torqued down to 76 foot-pounds. All right, right there. And now let's make sure our starter clutch, good, is still working. Because I'm pretty sure before, when I torqued it down, I just blocked this clutch right in there and I never realized it. So, all right, should work the way it's supposed to now. Now we can put our new starter in there and life should be good.